The sun had barely risen over the red cliffs when Lone Hawk stood at the edge of his people's camp, arms crossed, dark eyes scanning the horizon. He was not only a warrior of the Apache, but also one of its most respected hunters, known for his swiftness with the bow and his silence on the trail. His reputation had been earned through years of discipline, and with that discipline came certain expectations about the life he wished to lead. At 28 winters, he had resisted marriage longer than most men of his age. Suitors had been brought before him, young women with shining braids, patient eyes, and steady hands. Yet he had refused them all, not because he disdained marriage, but because he carried in his mind a very particular image of what his wife should be. He sought someone slim and light, a woman with the grace of a willow bending in the breeze, someone who would move quietly beside him, never demanding, never unsettling the rhythm of his life. It was with this vision that he approached the tribes. Elder matchmaker, Old Mother White Crane. She had guided unions for decades, pairing warriors with wives who balanced them, ensuring harmony between clans. She listened patiently as Lone Hawk described what he wanted. "I do not seek beauty for its own sake," he told her, though in truth, beauty mattered more to him than he admitted. "I seek a woman who is gentle. She should be delicate one, who will not disturb the order of my home." White Crane had narrowed her eyes at him, her face wrinkled like dried riverbed clay. "You wish for a woman like a shadow," she said, her voice raspy, thin, quiet, disappearing when the sun grows bright. Lone Hawk nodded, not noticing the faint smirk that tugged at the elder's lips. "Very well," White Crane replied. "I will find you such a bride. But remember, Lone Hawk, the Great Spirit often gives not what we ask for, but what we need." The warrior brushed aside her words. Wisdom from elders always came wrapped in riddles, and he had no patience for them when his mind was fixed on the image of his perfect bride. He wanted his request honored. Nothing more. When news spread through the camp that Lone Hawk was finally ready to wed, whispers buzzed like bees around the women's lodges. Mothers nudged their daughters. Young maidens blushed, some already daydreaming of walking beside the tall warrior whose hunting stories were told by firesides. Many had admired his strong shoulders and his stoic presence, though few had been bold enough to meet his gaze. Meanwhile, White Crane sent word to neighboring bands. She promised Lone Hawk a wife to his measure, someone who fit the image he carried so stubbornly. Families began preparing for the journey to present their daughters. The matchmaker busied herself with arrangements, her eyes glinting with the knowledge. She did not yet reveal. As days turned into weeks, Lone Hawk grew restless. He sharpened his arrows with more vigor than needed, paced the perimeter of the camp, and dreamed of the delicate maiden who would soon be his. In his mind, she was always slender and soft-spoken, moving gracefully with downcast eyes. He imagined teaching her to grind corn, to prepare venison strips, to weave mats for their home. Most of all, he imagined her silence never challenging, him never filling the lodge with noise. One morning, as he prepared to ride out with other hunters, Lone Hawk overheard two women laughing. "Do you think the warrior knows what he is asking for?" one teased. "Men always think they know," the other replied, her voice sly, "but the spirits love to play tricks." He frowned, annoyed by their words, though he could not shake the unease that crept into him. Still his pride overruled. Doubt. He was Lone Hawk, a man of precision and control. Surely even the spirits would respect the clarity of his request. The day finally arrived when the distant caravan of families could be seen approaching across the dry plain. Lone Hawk stood tall, arms folded, anticipation tightening in his chest. The women around him whispered and smiled, some exchanging knowing looks. White Crane watched him closely, her old eyes gleaming with mischief and prophecy. He believed he was moments away from receiving exactly the bride he had asked for. What he did not know was that the promise he had clung to so firmly would unravel in the most unexpected and unforgettable way. The procession of wagons and riders moved slowly across the plain, kicking up spirals of dust in the morning light. Children darted ahead, laughing, while mothers kept a careful eye on the livestock tethered to the sides. Lone Hawk watched it all from the rise near the camp, his jaw set, his chest rising with the anticipation of a man who believes destiny is finally at hand. His heart thudded harder as the group drew closer. He pictured the bride he had been promised, slender, shy, walking with her eyes lowered, her steps so light they left hardly a mark in the earth. He could almost see her now, the perfect silhouette against the horizon. When the caravan reached the camp, the air was filled with greetings, the exchange of gifts, and the chatter of relatives who hadn't met in many seasons. Lone Hawk, however, stood apart, his gaze searching for her. Then White Crane, the matchmaker, shuffled forward with that knowing smirk still plastered on her face. "Your bride has come," she said, her voice rough with age yet carrying a weight that silenced even the children nearby. From behind one of the wagons stepped Tala. Lone Hawk blinked. The woman before him was nothing like the slim vision he had carried in his heart for months. Tala was tall, with strong shoulders and wide hips that swayed with confidence. Her skin glowed warm beneath the desert sun, and her eyes sparkled with mischief. Her hair was thick, braided with feathers and beads, but it was her smile broad and unashamed that startled him most. And then there was her laugh. Loud, hearty, rolling across the camp like thunder in the canyon. It startled a few horses, made children giggle, and drew curious glances from every direction. Lone Hawk stiffened at the sound. This was no willow branch of a woman. This was fire, bold and bright, impossible to ignore. Tala marched toward him with the gait of someone who feared nothing. She did not lower her eyes, as tradition often dictated for a bride meeting her betrothed. Instead, she looked him up and down as though she were the one doing the choosing. "So," she said, her voice smooth but edged with humor, "you are the famous Lone Hawk." The warrior's mouth went dry. He had prepared a dozen words to welcome the delicate bride he had been promised, but they fled him now, leaving only silence. He gave a stiff nod, his dark eyes narrowing, trying not to let his disappointment show. Tala grinned wider, as if she had already read his thoughts. "Good," she said simply. "You look strong. A strong man needs a strong wife. Lucky for you, I have both strength and appetite." She patted her own hip with exaggerated pride, making a few nearby women cover their smiles with their hands. Lone Hawk felt heat rise in his chest, not the warmth of attraction but the burn of indignation. He turned sharply toward White Crane. "This is not the bride I asked for," he hissed under his breath. The old matchmaker shrugged, her expression full of mock innocence. "You asked for a wife, Lone Hawk. The Creator sent one." "But she is not." He struggled for the right words, his voice cracking with frustration. "Not what you pictured?" White Crane's eyes gleamed. "Perhaps your picture was too small." Lone Hawk bit back a retort. Pride kept him silent. Meanwhile, Tala had already made herself at home, helping unload baskets from the wagons, tossing instructions to children, laughing as though she had been part of the tribe forever. She carried a sack of corn as if it weighed nothing, then set it down with a thud that rattled the cooking pots. Lone Hawk caught himself staring, unsettled by her energy, her refusal to shrink into the role he had imagined for his bride. That night, when the camp gathered for a welcoming meal, Tala sat beside him. She ate heartily, savoring each bite, and told stories of her family's journey with gestures so large she nearly knocked over a water jug. Every time she laughed, Lone Hawk winced, feeling as though the sound was aimed directly at his pride. yet others were enchanted. Children clung to her, elders chuckled at her wit, and even the warriors leaned in to hear her bold opinions. Lone Hawk, however, sat rigid, his mind a storm of confusion. This was not the slim, quiet bride he had been promised. This was Tala Loud, curvy, strong, and utterly unafraid. And though he did not know it yet, she was about to turn his world upside down. That first night after Tala's arrival, Lone Hawk lay awake in his lodge, staring at the smoke hole in the roof. He could still hear her laugh outside with the women as they cleaned up after the feast. It rolled across the camp like a drumbeat, deep and contagious, making others laugh along with her. But to Lone Hawk, it felt like a constant reminder that his careful plans had been ignored. "This is not what I asked for," he muttered under his breath. He rolled onto his side, trying to convince himself that the matchmaker had simply made a mistake, that perhaps the slim, delicate maiden he had described was still on her way, and Tala had been meant for someone else. But when dawn came, Tala was already there, bustling about the camp with a woven basket balanced on her hip. She greeted everyone with a bold wave, her braids swinging, her bracelets jingling. Even the grumpiest of the old men cracked smiles at her jokes. Lone Hawk scowled, feeling an unfamiliar tightness in his chest. He kept his distance, hoping that his coldness would discourage her. When Tala came near him with a plate of roasted rabbit, he barely nodded and ate in silence. When she asked him about his hunts, he answered in clipped words. "Did you catch many deer last season?" she asked brightly. "Enough. Do you prefer bow or spear?" "Bow. Do you always speak like a rock?" Her eyes sparkled with mischief as she teased him, but Lone Hawk bristled. No woman had ever spoken to him so boldly, certainly not one who was supposed to be his bride. He told himself it was disrespectful, yet part of him was unsettled by the way her laughter lingered after her words. As the days passed, his doubts grew heavier. Tala was everything he had not wanted, loud where he had wished for quiet, strong where he had imagined delicacy, curvy and robust where he had pictured slimness. She did not sit demurely at the edge of the women's circle, she was the center of it, leading the stories, clapping her hands, stirring laughter like a storm. Lone Hawk began to wonder if the spirits were mocking him. He had always believed he could control his life with discipline, by sharpening his arrows, by training his body, by demanding precision in all things. Yet here was Tala, a woman he had not chosen, planted in his life like a stubborn cactus, impossible to ignore. One evening, he sought advice from his friend Running Bear, a warrior known for his quick wit. "This woman," Lone Hawk began, lowering his voice. "She is not as I expected," Running Bear smirked. "Not as you expected, or not as you wanted?" "She is too much." "Too much what?" "Too much everything," Lone Hawk snapped. "Too loud, too strong, too." He gestured vaguely at the air. "She takes up space like a river flooding its banks." Running Bear chuckled. River gives life, my friend. Would you rather a trickle of water that dries in the sun?" Lone Hawk glared at him, but Running Bear only laughed harder. The next morning, Lone Hawk watched Tala from afar as she carried a heavy log for the firewood pile. She balanced it across her shoulders, humming as though the weight meant nothing. Children trailed after her, clapping as if she were a performer. Lone Hawk crossed his arms, torn between irritation and reluctant admiration. He remembered the slender maiden he had pictured, a quiet shadow in the corner of his lodge. Would she have carried wood like that? Would she have kept the children entertained or traded jokes with the elders? His heart wrestled with the answer, but then Tala spotted him. She flashed a grin so wide it seemed to reach the sun. "Watching me work, husband?" she called out, her voice carrying across the camp. "You might learn something." The children burst into laughter. Lone Hawk felt his face burn with embarrassment as the eyes of half the camp turned toward him. Without answering, he turned on his heel and strode away, muttering under his breath. That night, as he lay on his bed again staring at the smoke hole, his doubts twisted deeper. He told himself she was not the woman for him. She was not slim, not delicate, not quiet. She was too much. And yet the echo of her laughter lingered in his ears, refusing to be shut out. By the fourth day of her arrival, it was clear to Tala that Lone Hawk's silence was not shyness, it was stubbornness. He avoided her gaze, answered her questions with one-word replies, and carried himself with the stiff pride of a man who thought he'd been wronged. Tala wasn't offended. She had grown up with brothers who wrestled her in the dust and cousins who teased her for being bigger and louder than the other girls. She had learned long ago that the best way to deal with a man's pride was not to bow to it, but to push against it until it cracked. And Lone Hawk, with his rigid jaw and quiet scowl, was practically begging for a challenge. The first opportunity came when the hunters prepared for a ride. Lone Hawk was tightening the reins of his swift bay horse when Tala strolled up, her braid swinging, her grin wide. "Is this the horse you ride into battle?" she asked, patting the animal's neck. "Yes," Lone Hawk replied flatly. "It looks fast," she said. Then her eyes sparkled. "But not faster than mine." Before he could react, she swung onto her own sturdy mare and kicked off at a gallop, leaving a cloud of dust behind her. Lone Hawk's pride bristled instantly. With a sharp command, he spurred his horse after her. The camp watched as the two thundered across the plain, their shouts and laughter echoing through the air. Lone Hawk pushed his horse harder, determined to outpace her. Yet every time he gained ground, Tala leaned forward, urging her mare with a burst of energy that kept her ahead. When they finally returned, Tala's cheeks were flushed with triumph. "You ride well," she said, her tone teasing. "But not well enough to beat me." Lone Hawk dismounted in silence, his face unreadable, though the heat in his chest was not entirely from the ride. The next challenge came at the trading circle, where settlers from the valley had arrived with goods, blankets, beads, and tools. Lone Hawk prided himself on his skill in bargaining. But as he approached a trader, Tala swept in ahead of him. "How much for this pot?" she asked, holding up a clay vessel. "2 deer hides," the trader answered. "2 hides? Ha! This pot is cracked." She pointed at a faint line. "1 hide and a basket of cornmeal." The trader frowned. "Impossible." Tala leaned in, smiling broadly. "Then you will keep a cracked pot no one else will buy." After a long pause, the trader sighed. "Very well. 1 hide and a basket." Lone Hawk blinked. He had never seen a bargain struck so quickly, and certainly not by a woman. Tala placed the pot in his arms as if it were his prize. "You're welcome, husband," she said with a wink, loud enough for the others to hear. The warriors laughed. Lone Hawk's ears burned. The final challenge of the day came in the form of laughter itself. Lone Hawk had been sitting with his bow, repairing a string, when Tala plopped down beside him. "Do you ever laugh?" she asked. "Sometimes." "When?" "When something is worth laughing at." She tilted her head. "So far, I have told 3 jokes, tripped over a dog, and made old Mother Gray Eyes spit water from her nose. And still, you are silent." Lone Hawk said nothing, focusing on his bow. Tala leaned closer, her eyes dancing. "Perhaps you are afraid that if you laugh, your face will crack." A few warriors nearby chuckled. Lone Hawk's hands tightened on the bowstring, but he kept his expression stern. Tala only grinned wider. "Very well," she said, standing with mock dignity. "If you will not laugh, then I will laugh enough for both of us." She threw back her head and let out a booming laugh that echoed across the camp. Children squealed. Women covered their mouths to hide their giggles, and even the men roared with amusement. Lone Hawk sat still, seething, but a strange thing happened inside him. Beneath his irritation, something in her boldness sparked a flicker of respect. She was not cowed by his silence, not defeated by his coldness. She met his pride head-on and refused to shrink. That night, as the fire crackled and Tala's laughter carried into the stars, Lone Hawk lay awake again. His doubts had not lessened, but his certainty had cracked just enough for a question to slip through. Was it possible that this woman, so opposite of what he had asked for, carried a strength his narrow vision had failed to see? The day of the Midsummer feast arrived, a celebration that brought together not only Lone Hawk's band, but also neighboring families from miles around. Fires crackled, long mats were laid out for food, and the air carried the smell of roasted venison, corn cakes, and sage. For most, it was a day of joy and fellowship. For Lone Hawk, it was a test. He dreaded what Tala might do before such a large audience. Already, she had unsettled him in private with her laughter, her teasing, and her boldness. What would she do now, when the entire camp gathered to watch? The feast began with music drums beating, rattles shaking, voices rising in chant. Then came the dancing, the women moving gracefully in a circle, their feet brushing the earth like whispers. Lone Hawk watched silently, relieved to see Tala waiting at the edge of the group, as though she might finally choose restraint. But Tala did not wait for long. With a mischievous glint in her eye, she stepped forward. Unlike the other women, whose movements were gentle and measured, Tala's dancing was fierce and joyful. She swung her hips, clapped her hands, and twirled with such energy that the children squealed and joined her. Her laughter rang out with every step, her braids flying, her feet pounding the earth in rhythm with the drum's dotted first. A few women frowned at her boldness. But soon the crowd was clapping along, swept up in her fire. Even the drummers leaned in, quickening the beat to match her stride. Lone Hawk sat stiffly, his arms crossed, trying not to let the pride swelling in his chest show on his face. She was not delicate, no, but she was captivating, alive in a way that drew everyone to her. When the dance ended, the people erupted in cheers. Tala bowed dramatically, laughing as if she had conquered the world. Lone Hawk looked away, pretending indifference. Though his heart betrayed him with an unsteady rhythm, the feast continued, and with it came a new challenge. A heavy timber had been brought for the bonfire, but it was too large for two men to carry. Lone Hawk rose to help, his muscles flexing as he gripped one end. Another warrior stepped forward for the other side, but before he could reach it, Tala strode up. "Move aside," she said cheerfully, gripping the timber with both hands. The warrior laughed. "This is no task for a woman." Tala arched a brow. "Then watch closely." With a mighty heave, she lifted her side of the timber, her arm steady, her stance strong. Lone Hawk was caught off guard, but had no choice but to adjust his grip and lift his end as well. Together, they carried the log through the crowd, Tala laughing the entire way, sweat gleaming on her brow. When they dropped it onto the fire pit, sparks shot into the air. The people roared in approval, pounding their fists against the ground. Tala spread her arms wide as though she had performed a great feat in a ceremony. "Did you see, husband?" she called, her voice ringing clear. "We are strong together." Lone Hawk froze. Heat burned in his chest, not just from embarrassment, but from something deeper he dared not name. Around him, warriors chuckled, women whispered, and children cheered Tala's name. She had not only proven her strength, but done so in a way that tied him to her in the eyes of the entire tribe. As night fell, the great fire blazed, its flames licking the sky. People sang and told stories, their faces glowing in the light. Tala sat among them, her voice loud, her laughter carrying above all others. Lone Hawk sat apart, staring into the flames, His mind churned with conflict. Tala was not the quiet willow he had demanded. She was a storm, a wildfire, a force of nature that could not be tamed. She embarrassed him, challenged him, even mocked him, but she also filled the camp with life in a way no one else could. For the first time since her arrival, Lone Hawk wondered if perhaps the Creator had not made a mistake after all, and yet he was still not ready to admit it. Pride held his tongue, even as his heart stirred with something dangerously close to admiration. The night after the feast, the fire in the camp smoldered low, glowing like embers in a giant hearth. The songs had faded, the laughter of children silenced as they curled against their mothers, and only the occasional bark of a dog broke the hush of the desert. Lone Hawk sat inside his lodge, sharpening his knife with slow, deliberate strokes, as though each scrape could grind away the thoughts that churned inside him, but the thoughts would not leave. They circled back again and again to Tala, her wild dancing, her booming laugh, the way she had carried the timber as though daring the whole world to challenge her. She unsettled him, shook the order he had tried so hard to preserve, and yet, when the tribe had cheered her, something inside him had swelled, pride mingling with irritation until he could no longer separate the two. He was still lost in thought when the flap of his lodge shifted and Tala stepped inside without hesitation. She carried a basket of roasted corn cakes, the smell filling the small space with warmth. "You sit alone," she said, setting the basket down. "That is no way for a man who is celebrated tonight." "I did not seek celebration, Lone," Hawk muttered, keeping his eyes on the blade. "Perhaps not, but it came to you all the same." She tilted her head, studying him with a boldness that made him tense. "Do you ever stop sharpening that knife? Or is silence your only companion?" Her teasing tone scraped against his pride, but there was no malice in her voice, only a kind of playfulness that dared him to respond. For the first time, instead of ignoring her, Lone Hawk set the knife aside. "You are loud," he said bluntly. Tala grinned. "And you are quiet. Perhaps that is why the spirits put us together." He frowned, but she only laughed, sitting beside him as though she had every right. She took one of the corn cakes, broke it in half, and offered him a piece. Their fingers brushed briefly, and to his surprise, the touch sent a jolt through him. He accepted the food without a word, chewing slowly while Tala chatted about the feast. "You know," she said between bites, "when you glared at me during the dance, I thought perhaps your face would crack, but it did not. You should be proud. It is a very strong face." Lone Hawk almost choked. He turned to scowl at her, but Tala's laughter filled the lodge, warm and full. Against his will, the corner of his mouth twitched upward. She noticed immediately. "Ah, there it is." A smile. "Do it again, husband, before the night ends." "I am not a child to be ordered," he said, but his voice had softened. For a moment, silence stretched between them, not cold, but thick with something unspoken. Tala leaned closer, her eyes searching his. "You think I am not the bride you wanted," she said quietly, her laughter gone. "But perhaps I am the bride you need." Her words struck him like an arrow. Before he could reply, she reached for his hand and laced her fingers with his. Her grip was firm, strong as the rest of her, and yet there was warmth in it that softened his chest. The fire crackled. The night outside deepened. Lone Hawk, for the first time, did not pull away. One thing led to another. Tala's laughter softened into whispers, her boldness into tenderness, and Lone Hawk found himself swept into her storm. When at last they lay together, the lodge trembled with their movements, the woven mats creaking, the cedar bed groaning. Under their weight, then, with a sharp crack, the bed collapsed beneath them. For a heartbeat, there was stunned silence. Lone Hawk lay on his back in the dust, blinking at the ceiling. Tala, sprawled beside him, stared wide-eyed, then burst into peals of uncontrollable laughter. It rolled through the lodge, louder than ever, so infectious that even Lone Hawk, mortified though he was, could not hold back. His deep chuckle joined hers, filling the night until the camp dogs howled. The bed was broken. His pride was dented, but something else had cracked open too. The wall he had built around himself. For the first time, Lone Hawk did not feel betrayed by fate. He felt chosen. The next morning, the camp stirred early with the sounds of children chasing each other, women grinding corn, and men preparing for the day's hunt. Lone Hawk emerged from his lodge looking more battle-worn than triumphant. Dust clung to his hair, and his usually stoic face carried a shadow of unease behind him. Tala strolled out with her usual wide grin, stretching her arms as if she had slept in perfect comfort. A few neighbors glanced curiously their way, noticing the disheveled state of Lone Hawk's lodge, the crooked poles, and the woven mats scattered at odd angles. One child pointed and giggled. By midday, the whispers had begun. "Did you hear? Lone Hawk's cedar bed cracked like dry kindling. They say it split in half." Perhaps Tala's laughter was too heavy for it. No, it was the warrior himself. He finally met his match. The gossip spread like wildfire, and before long, even the elders were chuckling behind their hands. Lone Hawk tried to ignore it, but every laugh that rippled through the camp stabbed at his pride. For a man who valued silence and control, there was nothing worse than being the subject of public amusement. He stalked through camp with his jaw clenched. Determined not to acknowledge the incident, Tala, however, leaned into the chaos with unshakable joy. At the waterhole, when women asked her about the night, she slapped her thigh and roared with laughter. "Yes, it is true," she admitted boldly. "The bed gave up its spirit beneath us. Perhaps it could not handle so much fire in one lodge." The women laughed so hard they nearly spilled their water. Tala only laughed louder. By the evening meal, the story had grown into legend. Children reenacted the scene, collapsing onto the ground with exaggerated groans. Warriors teased Lone Hawk with sly grins. "Brother," one said, "you should have built your bed with stronger wood." Another added, "Or perhaps you should not wrestle so fiercely in the night." Even Running Bear, his closest friend, could not resist a jab. "The Great Spirit tests us in many ways," he said, struggling to contain his laughter. "Yours came in the form of a woman who breaks not only your pride, but your furniture." The camp erupted. Lone Hawk, face hot with humiliation, pushed away his bowl of venison and rose to leave. But Tala caught his arm before he could storm off. "Sit," she commanded, her tone playful but firm. "Why do you let laughter wound you? These people do not mock to hurt. They laugh because they are happy. Why not laugh with them?" Lone Hawk glared at her. "A warrior is not a fool to be laughed at. A warrior is also a man," Tala countered, her eyes sharp. "And a man who cannot laugh at himself is weaker than one who can." The words struck deeper than he wanted to admit. For a long moment he stared at her, torn between anger and something more complicated. Tala, unbothered, lifted her bowl and ate with gusto, chuckling every so often as if to remind him that laughter was not the enemy he believed it to be. That night, lying once more in their lodge, this time on a hastily repaired frame of logs, Lone Hawk could not sleep. He replayed the events in his mind, the bed's collapse, Tala's roaring laughter, the tribe's amused whispers. Shame gnawed at him, but beneath it stirred something he could not deny. When the people had laughed, Tala had not hidden or shrunk. She had not tried to soothe his wounded pride. She had faced the camp with her chin high, her laughter loud, and in doing so, she had turned humiliation into celebration. Could he have done the same if the roles were reversed? The question troubled him. It also humbled him. For the first time, he considered that perhaps strength was not found in silence alone, nor in stoic pride. Perhaps true strength was the ability to face the world openly, to laugh when fate played its jokes, to embrace joy even when dignity cracked like a cedar bed. Beside him, Tala snored softly, her chest rising and falling with the ease of someone utterly at peace. Lone Hawk turned his head to look at her. In the dim light of the embers, she was not the slim, delicate bride he had once demanded. She was vibrant, unashamed, larger than life, and she was his. He exhaled slowly, the weight of pride easing just a little. For the first time, he wondered if the tribe's laughter had not been at his expense, but in celebration of the life Tala had brought to him, and against his will, a smile ghosted across his lips. The days after the infamous bed-breaking settled into a rhythm, though the story lingered like a favorite song on every tongue. Children still collapsed in mock dramatics. Warriors still teased Lone Hawk when they passed. And even the elders chuckled whenever they glanced at Tala. But something within Lone Hawk had shifted. At first, he resisted it. He told himself he was only tolerating her, only enduring the laughter until the story faded. Yet when he watched Tala laugh with the children or barter boldly with the traders, he felt a strange warmth in his chest, one that pride could no longer disguise. One afternoon, he found himself following her without meaning to. Tala was out by the river, washing a blanket. She sang as she worked, her voice low and steady, weaving into the wind like a chant. Lone Hawk stood silently in the shade of a mesquite tree, listening. There was no audience here, no crowd to impress, yet she sang anyway. For herself, for the river, for the sky. It struck him then how different she was from the woman he had demanded. He had asked for a willow branch, slim, quiet, fragile. Instead, he had been given a storm-loud, curvy, unbreakable. But perhaps the Creator had known better than he did. A willow bent with the wind, yes, but it could also snap. A storm, though wild, carried rain and life to the desert. That night, Lone Hawk did something he had not done since Tala's arrival. He spoke to her without hesitation. "You are strong," he said simply as they sat by the fire. Tala arched a brow. "Of course. I carried half a tree on my back, remember?" He almost smiled. "Not only in your body, in your spirit." For a moment, her usual laughter softened into something quieter, deeper. "And you are finally seeing me as I am, not as you wished me to be?" Lone Hawk nodded. "Yes." Her hand reached for his, squeezing firmly. "Then perhaps you are not as hard as a rock after all." The next day, the tribe gathered for a hunt. Tala, to no one's surprise, insisted on joining. Lone Hawk wanted to protest, but he remembered her strength and bit back the words. Together they rode out across the plain. When the deer finally scattered, Lone Hawk loosed an arrow that struck true. As he moved to claim the kill, he realized Tala had ridden close behind him, not out of recklessness but readiness. She had his back as surely as any warrior. Later, as they returned with the game, Lone Hawk felt the eyes of the tribe upon him. For the first time, he did not feel embarrassed by Tala's boldness. Instead, he felt proud to have her at his side. Proud that her laughter filled the air. Proud that the woman who broke his bed also broke through his pride. That evening, as the firelight danced and the people feasted, Lone Hawk stood. His voice carried over the crowd, steady and sure. "You all know the story of the broken bed," he said, drawing chuckles from every corner. "But hear me now. The bed was not broken by weight nor by foolishness. It was broken because the spirits gave me a wife too strong for cedar and too full of life for silence." The camp erupted in cheers and laughter, this time not at his expense but in celebration. Tala rose beside him, her laughter booming as always, and this time Lone Hawk laughed with her. In that moment, the tribe saw what he finally understood. He had not been cursed with the wrong bride. He had been blessed with the only one who could match him, not with silence, but with fire. That night, when they returned to their lodge, Lone Hawk looked at the repaired bed and chuckled. "If it breaks again," he murmured, "I will not be ashamed." Tala leaned into him, her smile softer than usual. "Good. Then let us see if it holds." For the first time in his life, Lone Hawk felt not only strong, but complete. The willow he had asked for would have bent to his will. The storm he had been given instead swept him off his feet and carried him somewhere far greater than he had imagined. And so, the warrior who once demanded a slim bride learned to cherish the Curvy, one who broke his bed because she also broke the walls around his heart.